All right, welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. Today, we're going to Mexico City,
Okay.
a megacity, facing some serious water challenges. So you've probably heard about water scarcity
Yeah.
there, but have you ever stopped to think about what the law actually says about access to water?
Interesting.
We're going to look at excerpts from the Mexican Constitution,
Okay.
specifically Articles 4 and 27. And get this, they seem to say different things about who controls the water and who has the right to it.
Really?
It's kind of a head-scratcher.
Yeah, I'd be curious to hear more about this.
So we've got Article 27,
Okay.
dating all the way back to 1917. And it states that water is national property.
Okay.
So basically, the government has control, which kind of makes sense after a revolution, right?
Yeah, I can see that.
You want to make sure that resources are distributed fairly.
Right.
But then along comes Article 4, added in 2012,
Much later.
much later,
Yeah.
which explicitly says that everyone has a right to water.
Huh.
So how do these two ideas work together in practice? Is one more important than the other?
Well, it's not really a matter of one overriding the other. It's more like Mexico is grappling with this global shift in thinking about water.
Interesting.
Article 27 came out of the Mexican Revolution,
Right.
a time when the focus was on nationalizing resources for the
Mhm.
common good. But Article 4 reflects a growing worldwide recognition of water as a basic human right.
I see. So two very different ideas reflecting different historical contexts.
Exactly.
Like, practically speaking, how does this work on the ground? If you're living in Mexico City, who ultimately decides if you get water and how much?
Well, that's where the plot thickens a little.
Oh, boy.
Article 4, while it declares the right to water,
Uh-huh.
also says that the law will define how that right is managed.
The law will define. That sounds like a pretty big loophole. So does that mean that the government can just decide however it wants to manage water, even if it means some people don't get enough?
Well, it's not quite a free-for-all. Mexico has a pretty complex system of laws and regulations that try to balance these principles.
Okay.
For example, there are laws on water concessions,
Okay.
which grant rights to use water for specific purposes,
Uh-huh.
and regulations on water tariffs,
Okay.
which aim to make water affordable, but also encouraging conservation.
So there are attempts to balance the needs of industry, agriculture, and everyday people.
Exactly.
But what happens when there isn't enough water to go around? We know that Mexico City faces water scarcity.
Right.
Are there conflicts between these big constitutional ideas and the reality of drought?
Absolutely. During droughts, the government often has to implement water rationing,
Okay.
which can be very controversial.
Sure.
I mean, think about it. On paper, everyone has a right to water, but in practice, what happens when there simply isn't enough?
Right?
Those decisions about who gets water and who has to cut back can be really, really difficult.
It makes me think about the different neighborhoods in Mexico City. Are there disparities in access? Do wealthier neighborhoods have more reliable access to water even during times of scarcity?
That's a really good question, and it's actually something that researchers and activists are looking into very closely.
Interesting.
There's a concern that while these constitutional articles aim for equity,
Mm-hmm.
the reality on the ground might be different, ensuring that everyone gets their fair share. Especially in a megacity with limited resources, it's a constant challenge.
So it's almost like Mexico is walking a tightrope, trying to balance national control with individual rights while also dealing with this very real problem of water scarcity.
Yes.
So we've got these legal frameworks, but how do they actually translate into the lives of everyday people in Mexico City? What does this all mean for someone who turns on their tap and nothing comes out?
That's the question, isn't it? It brings up kind of another layer of complexity.
Okay.
How do you enforce these rights? What legal recourse do people have if they feel like their right to water isn't being met? These are all issues that Mexico is still working through.
So much to think about. We've gone from high-level constitutional principles to the very real challenges of managing this precious resource. In a rapidly growing city, it really makes you wonder, if you were living in Mexico City, how would these constitutional rights actually impact your daily life? Would you feel secure in your access to water? Or constantly worried about shortages and rationing?
That's something to ponder.
It is something to ponder. And it highlights how water access isn't just a legal issue,
Right.
but it's deeply intertwined with social equity, environmental sustainability,
Absolutely.
and even political stability. A reminder that sometimes the most basic things, like turning on the tap and having water flow, are actually tied to these really complex, interconnected systems.
It is fascinating.
Well, thanks for helping us unpack all of this.
My pleasure.
And to all of you listening, keep diving deeper into the issues that matter to you. We'll see you on the next Deep Dive.